Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the readings on her computer screen for the third time. The numbers didn't change. The massive underground cavern beneath the Pacific Ocean was collapsing, not slowly like they had predicted, but fast, really fast. "How long do we have?" asked Dr. Martinez, leaning over her shoulder. 6 weeks, maybe 7 if we're lucky. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she typed. "The entire seafloor is going to cave in. When it does, the tsunami will be unlike anything in recorded history." The emergency meeting room filled with scientists, government officials, and military leaders within hours. Maps covered every wall. Red zones marked the areas that would be underwater when the collapse happened. The red covered most of the Pacific coastlines: Japan, California, Thailand, Australia, Chile. Millions of people lived in those red zones. General Morrison stood at the front of the room. His gray hair was perfectly combed, but his eyes showed the weight of what they all knew. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at the largest evacuation in human history. We have 43 days to move approximately 200 million people to safety." Silence filled the room. 200 million people. 43 days. "That's impossible," whispered someone from the back. "No," said a quiet voice. Everyone turned to look at Maria Santos, a community organizer from Los Angeles. She had been invited because her neighborhood programs had saved thousands during the last earthquake. "It's not impossible. It's just really, really hard." Maria stood up slowly. She was barely 5 feet tall, but when she spoke, everyone listened. "My grandmother used to tell me about her village in El Salvador. When the volcano threatened to erupt, every single person helped. The strong carried the weak. The young guided the old. The rich shared with the poor. Nobody asked what they would get back. They just helped." She walked to the map on the wall and pointed to the red zones. "These aren't just numbers. These are families, children, grandparents, people with dreams and fears and hopes. And if we remember that every single life matters, we'll find a way." The next morning, the news broke. Every television channel, every radio station, every internet site carried the same message. The planet was calling for help, not from governments or armies, but from ordinary people with extraordinary hearts. Within hours, something remarkable began to happen. In Tokyo, Hiroshi Tanaka closed his small restaurant and put a sign in the window. "Gone to help evacuate coastal villages. Free meals for anyone who needs them when I return." He loaded his delivery truck with rice and vegetables and drove toward the danger zones. In San Francisco, 12-year-old Emma Rodriguez emptied her piggy bank. She had been saving for a new bicycle for 2 years. Instead, she bought as many blankets as she could carry and walked to the nearest evacuation center. "People are going to be cold," she told the volunteer coordinator. "Bikes can wait." In Sydney, retired teacher Margaret Walsh called every former student she could reach. Within 6 hours, she had organized a convoy of school buses driven by volunteers. They were heading to remote coastal communities to bring elderly residents to safety. The stories spread faster than the news itself. Social media filled with pictures and videos. A construction crew in Vancouver working for free to build temporary shelters. A group of truck drivers forming a supply line stretching from inland warehouses to evacuation sites. Doctors and nurses leaving their hospitals to set up medical stations in refugee camps. But it was the message from Maya Patel in Mumbai that changed everything. Maya was a software engineer who had created an app for connecting volunteers with people who needed help. She posted a video from her apartment, speaking directly to her phone camera. Her English was simple and clear. "My name is Maya. I live in a city that floods every year during monsoon season. I know what it feels like when the water comes and you have nowhere to go. I know what it means when strangers become family because they help you survive." She paused and looked directly into the camera. "The ocean is going to rise. Millions of people need to move. But here's what I learned from every flood I've survived. When the water comes, people don't ask what language you speak or what God you pray to or how much money you have. They ask if you need help, and then they help. Maya held up her phone. I built something. It's called Help Now. You put in where you are and what you need. Someone near you who can help will see it. You put in where you are and what you can give. Someone who needs it will find you. She smiled, and for a moment her small apartment felt like the center of the world. We have 40 days left. The planet is asking for help. But the planet isn't some big scary thing. The planet is us, all of us, and I think we're going to answer. Within 24 hours, Help Now had been downloaded 12 million times. The app lit up like a Christmas tree. Red dots showed people who needed help. Blue dots showed people offering help. Green lines connected them when matches were made. The map of the world became a living web of human kindness. In Portland, Oregon, retired carpenter James Wilson saw a request from a family with 3 young children who needed transportation inland. James had a pickup truck and 40 years of moving experience. He drove 8 hours to reach them, loaded their most precious belongings in his truck bed, and drove them to his daughter's farm in Idaho. The family stayed in his daughter's guest room. James drove back to Portland the next day to help another family. In Bangkok, street food vendor Siriporn Chatterjee organized every vendor in her market. They cooked non-stop for 3 days, preparing thousands of meals in portable containers. A convoy of volunteers delivered the food to evacuation centers along the Thai coast. Siriporn's green curry fed families who hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her somtam salad brought smiles to children who had lost their toys but not their appetites. The stories multiplied like ripples in water. Dr. Patricia Williams, a pediatrician from Chicago, flew to California with nothing but a medical bag and a credit card. She set up a clinic in a school gymnasium and treated everything from scraped knees to anxiety attacks. When a little boy asked if the ocean was angry at them, she sat with him for an hour, explaining how sometimes the earth changes and it's nobody's fault. She drew pictures of tectonic plates on his cast, while she told him about how brave he was for helping his baby sister during the evacuation. In London, taxi driver Abdul Rahman organized a fleet of volunteer drivers to transport elderly and disabled people from care facilities near the coast. He worked 18 hours a day for a week, refusing payment from anyone. When asked why, he said simply, "My mother is elderly. If she needed help and I wasn't there, I would want someone like me to help her." But perhaps the most powerful story came from an unexpected place. Yuki Sato was a hikikomori, one of Japan's reclusive shut-ins who rarely left their apartments. For 3 years, Yuki had lived in a small room in Osaka, ordering everything online, speaking to almost no one. The news of the collapse terrified him, but not for the reasons others might expect. Yuki was terrified that he wouldn't be able to help. He had watched the Help Now app requests pour in from his region. Families needing transportation, elderly people needing assistance packing, children needing comfort during the chaos. Yuki wanted to help but felt paralyzed by his anxiety about leaving his apartment. Then he remembered something he was good at. Yuki was a master at online logistics. He had spent years optimizing delivery routes for his own needs, tracking packages, finding the best deals across dozens of websites. He understood systems and networks and how to make complex things work smoothly. He opened his laptop and began to work. Within 6 hours, Yuki had created the most efficient evacuation routing system anyone had seen. He mapped every road, every possible traffic bottleneck, every alternate route. He calculated optimal departure times to prevent overcrowding. He identified which vehicles should carry which types of supplies to maximize efficiency. More importantly, he had figured out how to coordinate it all through Help Now. Yuki's routing system turned chaos into choreography. Evacuation convoys that should have taken days were completed in hours. Supplies reached the people who needed them most. Families found each other in refugee centers because Yuki had created a tracking system that respected privacy while ensuring no one was lost. He never left his apartment. But Yuki Sato became one of the most crucial volunteers in the entire Pacific region evacuation. The world began to notice something remarkable was happening. News anchors struggled to describe it. Economists couldn't explain it. Politicians tried to take credit for it, but everyone knew the truth. This wasn't coming from governments or corporations or institutions. This was coming from something deeper and more powerful. This was coming from the human heart. Maria Santos, the community organizer who had spoken up in that first meeting, found herself coordinating with volunteers across 6 time zones. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates, requests, offers of help. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night since the evacuation began, but she had never felt more energized. "You know what's amazing?" she told Dr. Chen during a brief video call. "We thought this was about moving people away from danger, but really, it's about moving people toward each other." Dr. Chen nodded from her command center, where screens showed the latest readings from the ocean floor. The collapse was accelerating slightly, but the evacuations were accelerating faster. "How many people have we moved so far?" 47 million, Maria said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "But more importantly, we've connected millions more. People who were strangers a week ago are now family. Communities that had never talked to each other are sharing resources. Countries that had been arguing about borders are collaborating on refugee support." She paused, looking at her phone as another 100 help requests and offers appeared on Help Now. "I think we might actually do this." But even as hope grew, everyone knew the hardest part was still ahead. Moving people was one challenge. Keeping them safe, fed, sheltered, and connected to hope for weeks or months while they rebuilt their lives, that was another challenge entirely. And they only had 26 days left before the ocean floor collapsed. The planet had called for help, and millions had answered. But the real test of human kindness was just beginning. The message appeared on Help Now at 3:17 a.m. Pacific Time. It wasn't like the thousands of other requests for transportation, food, or shelter. This message was different. It was marked as Priority Level Red, which meant it came directly from the Global Emergency Coordination Center. Maya Patel was still awake in Mumbai, monitoring the app she had created. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she read the urgent request. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. The message was simple and terrifying. "Need 67 volunteers for special assignment. High risk. Potential to save millions of additional lives. Must be willing to enter collapse zone during final 48 hours. Technical skills preferred but not required. Courage required. Contact Dr. Sarah Chen immediately." Maya stared at the screen. The collapse zone. That meant the area where the ocean floor was actively cracking, where the water was already beginning to behave strangely, where the emergency teams had stopped sending people because it was too dangerous. Why 67 people? Why that exact number? Maya picked up her phone and called Dr. Chen's emergency line. "Dr. Chen? This is Maya Patel, the Help Now creator. I'm looking at your priority message. What's happening?" Dr. Chen's voice was tired but urgent. "Maya, we've discovered something. The collapse isn't random. There are 67 critical stress points along the fault line. If we can relieve the pressure at those specific points, we might be able to slow the collapse enough to evacuate another 50 million people." "How do you relieve pressure on the ocean floor?" "Controlled explosions. Very small, very precise, very dangerous. Each stress point needs a team of 1 person to place the charges and get out. The timing has to be perfect. If even 1 person is late or places a charge incorrectly, the whole plan fails and the collapse happens immediately." Maya felt her heart racing. "So you need 67 people willing to dive to the bottom of an unstable ocean to place bombs and hope they can swim back up before everything explodes. That's one way to put it. And if they don't volunteer, 50 million more people will die when the collapse happens ahead of schedule. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she started typing. Dr. Chen, the message is going up now, but I'm making one change. I'm adding a note that says volunteers can submit video messages explaining why they're willing to do this. I think people need to know who these 67 people are. If they're going to risk everything to save lives, the world should remember them. Within 6 hours, 847 people had volunteered. The videos began appearing immediately. A grandmother from Japan who said her grandchildren deserve to grow up in a world where people help each other. A college student from Peru who explained that he was studying marine biology because he loved the ocean and wanted to give something back. A former soldier from Australia who had spent years learning to dive in dangerous situations and finally had a chance to use those skills to save lives instead of ending them. But it was the video from David Murphy that made people stop and really think about what was happening. David was a lobster fisherman from Maine. He was 45 years old, with calloused hands and a thick accent. He had never spoken to a camera before, and it showed. He kept looking away from his phone and fidgeting with a coffee cup. I guess I should explain why I want to do this, he said, clearing his throat. I've been fishing these waters for 23 years. My father fished them before me. His father before him. We Murphys have been pulling lobsters out of the North Atlantic for 4 generations. He paused and looked directly at the camera. Last week, I got a call from my daughter in California. She's pregnant with my first grandchild. She lives 3 miles from the coast. When that ocean floor collapses, the wave will be 40 feet high when it reaches her neighborhood. David set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. I know these waters. I know how to dive in rough conditions. I know how to work fast underwater and get back to the surface. And I know that if 67 people don't do this job, my grandchild might never be born. He smiled, and suddenly he didn't look nervous anymore. That's why I'm volunteering, not because I'm brave or special, because I'm a grandfather who wants to meet his grandchild. The video had been viewed 12 million times within 24 hours. Dr. Chen and her team faced an impossible decision. They needed exactly 67 volunteers, but they had 847. How do you choose who gets to risk their life to save others? The answer came from an unexpected source. Yuki Sato, the hikikomori in Osaka, who had never left his apartment but had revolutionized the evacuation logistics, sent a message to Dr. Chen. I have analyzed all 847 volunteer profiles, geographic distribution, diving experience, technical skills, age, health status, family situation. I can create an optimal team. Dr. Chen called him immediately. Yuki, this isn't about optimization. These are people's lives. Exactly, Yuki replied quietly. That's why it has to be optimized. Every choice affects whether the mission succeeds, whether 50 million people live or die, whether these 67 volunteers come home to their families. Yuki had spent 3 days analyzing every volunteer video, every profile, every piece of data. He had calculated distances from home bases to stress points. He had researched diving certifications and medical histories. He had even analyzed speech patterns and body language in the videos to assess psychological stability under pressure. But most importantly, he had seen something the others had missed. Dr. Chen, Yuki said, what if the mission isn't just about placing charges? What if it's about proving something? What do you mean? Look at the volunteers, really look at them. They're from every continent, every culture, every background, rich and poor, young and old, educated and self-taught. Some are experts, some have never done anything like this before, but they all volunteered for the same reason. Yuki's voice got stronger as he continued. They volunteered because they believe every life matters. The mother from Kenya who works 3 jobs but still found time to apply. The teenager from Canada who lied about his age because he wants to help. The retired teacher from Brazil who said she's taught children their whole lives and now wants to save them. Yuki, I still don't understand. The 67 volunteers shouldn't just be the most qualified people. They should represent all of us, every kind of human who answered the planet's call, because when this is over and people tell the story of what happened, they need to see themselves in those 67 people. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Send me your list." The final 67 were announced the next morning. David Murphy, the lobster fisherman from Maine, was selected for Stress Point 23 in the North Atlantic. His diving experience and knowledge of cold water conditions made him ideal for the location. Fatima al-Rashid, a diving instructor from Egypt who had volunteered because the ocean connects all of us, was chosen for Stress Point number 15 in the Mediterranean. Carlos Mendoza, a oil rig worker from Mexico who had learned underwater welding to support his 5 children, was assigned to Stress Point number 31 in the Pacific. Each of the 67 had a story. Each had a reason for volunteering that was both deeply personal and universally human. There was Lin Wei, a marine biologist from China who had spent her career studying coral reefs and wanted to protect the ocean she loved. There was Kofi Asante from Ghana, a fisherman who had seen how rising sea levels were already affecting his village and wanted to prevent worse damage. There was Isabella Rossi from Italy, a young woman who had learned to dive because her brother died in a diving accident, and she wanted to understand the waters that had taken him. There was John Clearwater, a member of the Maka tribe in Washington state, who said the ocean had fed his people for thousands of years, and it was time to give something back. Each story was shared on Help Now, creating a mosaic of human experience and motivation. People around the world began following specific volunteers, learning about their lives, their families, their hopes. But as the volunteers prepared for their mission, the situation on land was becoming more challenging. The evacuated areas were emptying, but the refugee centers were overcrowding. 78 million people had been moved away from the danger zones, but housing them, feeding them, and providing medical care was straining resources everywhere. That's when the second wave of human kindness began. It started with small acts. Families in inland areas offering spare bedrooms to evacuee families. Restaurants donating meals. Schools opening their gymnasiums as temporary shelters. But it grew into something remarkable. In Kansas, wheat farmers worked around the clock to harvest early and donate grain to refugee centers. In Vermont, maple syrup producers sent truckloads of their product to add sweetness to what had become a diet of emergency rations. In Nigeria, textile workers created thousands of blankets and shipped them to evacuation centers around the world. In Argentina, cattle ranchers organized the largest meat donation in history. The stories kept coming. A group of mechanics in Detroit rebuilt school buses to transport evacuees, working for free and sleeping in their garage. A team of software developers in India created a translation app specifically for refugee centers, helping evacuees communicate with local volunteers who spoke different languages. A network of pilots in Canada organized supply flights to remote evacuation centers, using their own planes and fuel. But perhaps the most touching story came from the children. 8-year-old Aisha Okafor from London started making friendship bracelets for evacuee children who had lost their toys. She taught other children how to make them too. Within a week, kids across Europe were making friendship bracelets. The small gifts became symbols of hope and connection in refugee centers everywhere. In Tokyo, 10-year-old Hiro Tanaka organized his entire school to write letters to evacuated children. Each letter included a drawing and a message like, "You are brave," or "We are thinking of you." The letters were translated into dozens of languages and distributed to refugee centers across the Pacific region. The project spread to schools worldwide. Millions of children began writing letters and drawing pictures for evacuee children they would never meet, but considered friends. Meanwhile, the 67 volunteers were preparing for the most dangerous rescue mission in human history. They trained in deep-sea diving facilities around the world, practicing with the specialized equipment they would need. Each volunteer would carry precisely calculated explosive charges designed to relieve pressure without causing additional damage. The margin for error was essentially zero. Dr. Chen coordinated the mission from a command ship positioned safely outside the collapse zone. The timing had to be perfect. All 67 charges had to be placed and detonated within a 6-hour window, or the pressure relief wouldn't work. More importantly, all 67 volunteers had to reach the surface and get to safety before the ocean floor began shifting. 3 days before the mission, Maya Patel received an unexpected message through Help Now. It was from a child named Emma in one of the refugee centers. "Dear App Lady," the message read, "My mom said you made the thing that helped us find help when our house got flooded. I wanted to say thank you. Also, I drew a picture of the 67 heroes who are going to save more people. My mom said every one of them is someone's family. I hope they all come home safe." Attached to the message was a child's drawing of 67 stick figures holding hands around a circle with hearts drawn above each one. Maya stared at the drawing for a long time. Then she shared it on Help Now with a simple caption. "This is why we do this. This is who we're saving. This is who we are." The drawing was shared millions of times in the next 24 hours. It appeared on news broadcasts, on social media, printed on flyers in refugee centers. The 67 stick figures became the symbol of the mission. But as the day of the dive approached, everyone knew that success wasn't guaranteed. The volunteers were brave and skilled, but they were still human beings attempting something that had never been tried before in conditions that were extremely dangerous. The planet had called for help, and hundreds of millions of people had answered. But now everything depended on 67 individuals who had volunteered to risk everything for strangers they would never meet. The night before the mission, each of the 67 volunteers recorded a final message, not for the media or for history, but for their families, just in case. David Murphy sat in his hotel room in Nova Scotia, looking at a photo of his pregnant daughter. His message was simple. "Sweetheart, by the time you see this, you'll know whether Grandpa's plan worked. Either way, I want you to know that you and that baby are the reason I did this. The world is full of good people who care about each other. I want my grandchild to grow up knowing that." Around the world, 66 other people recorded similar messages. Messages of love, hope, and the belief that human kindness was worth any risk. In 18 hours, they would find out if they were right. Dawn broke gray and choppy over the Pacific Ocean. 67 boats moved through the rough water toward their assigned coordinates. Each boat carried one volunteer, one dive master, and equipment that could save 50 million lives or kill everyone trying. Dr. Sarah Chen watched from the command vessel, surrounded by screens showing the location of every volunteer. Her hands gripped her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "All teams, this is command," she spoke into her headset. "Final systems check. We are go for descent in 60 minutes. Around the world, billions of people were watching. Schools had stopped classes. Offices had closed early. Families gathered around televisions and phones and computers. The Help Now app showed a map with 67 pulsing dots representing each volunteer's position. In Mumbai, Maya Patel hadn't slept in 36 hours. She sat in her apartment monitoring the global response to the mission. Messages of support were flooding in faster than her servers could process them. 67 Heroes was trending in 43 languages, but it was the smaller messages that moved her most. "Dear Fatima al-Rashid," wrote a child from Morocco, "You don't know me, but you are saving my cousin who lives near the ocean. My whole class is praying for you." To David Murphy from Maine, posted a teenager from California. "My mom is pregnant too, and we live near the coast. Thank you for caring about babies you've never met." Isabella Rossi, typed an elderly man from Italy. My grandson is studying marine biology because of people like you. Come home safe so he can meet his hero." The messages kept coming, millions of them. People who had never met these 67 volunteers but had come to love them, to see them as family, to understand that their courage represented the best of humanity. At 800 hours Pacific time, the mission began. David Murphy was the first to enter the water. Stress point number 23 was in the deepest part of his assigned area, 180 feet below the surface. As a lobster fisherman, he had dived in rough conditions before, but never with the weight of 50 million lives depending on his success. The water was strangely warm, a sign that the ocean floor was already shifting. David descended slowly, checking his equipment every few feet. In his waterproof pack was a specially designed charge about the size of a lunchbox. It looked simple, but it had taken engineers 3 weeks to calculate the exact explosive force needed. At 160 feet, David saw the stress fracture. It was bigger than anyone had predicted, a crack in the ocean floor that stretched as far as he could see in both directions. Gas bubbles rose from the crack, making the water shimmer. "Command, this is Murphy," he spoke into his underwater communicator. "Stress fracture is larger than expected. Estimate 40 feet wide, unknown length. Beginning charge placement." David swam to the exact coordinates Yuki Sato had calculated. The placement had to be precise to within 3 feet, or the pressure relief wouldn't work correctly. David positioned the charge and activated its magnetic clamps. The device attached itself to the ocean floor and began its countdown sequence. He had 12 minutes to reach the surface before the charge detonated. All around the Pacific, 66 other volunteers were doing the same thing. Each stress point was different. Some were shallow, only 60 feet down. Others required descents to over 200 feet. Some fractures were narrow cracks. Others were wide chasms, with water so turbulent it was hard to see. Lin Wei, the marine biologist from China, discovered that her stress point was located in a coral reef. The colorful fish swimming around the fracture seemed unaware of the danger. Lin carefully placed her charge to minimize damage to the coral while still achieving the pressure relief they needed. "It's beautiful down here," she reported to command. "The fish don't know the world might end. They're just living their lives, trusting that tomorrow will come." Kofi Asante from Ghana found something unexpected at his stress point. A family of dolphins was circling the fracture, their sonar clicks echoing strangely in the turbulent water. When Kofi approached with his charge, the dolphins moved aside but didn't swim away. They watched him work, as if they understood he was there to help. "I think they know," Kofi reported. "The dolphins, they know something is wrong with the ocean floor. They're staying close like they want to help." Isabella Rossi faced the most dangerous placement. Her stress point was in an underwater canyon where the current was so strong she could barely control her descent. The fracture was nearly vertical, requiring her to place the charge on a cliff face while fighting the current that threatened to smash her against the rocks. 3 times the current pushed her away from the target location. 3 times she fought her way back. Her air supply was running low, but she refused to surface without completing the mission. "Isabella, you need to abort." Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the communicator. "Your air levels are too low." "Negative, Command. I'm almost there." Isabella wedged herself between 2 rocks to fight the current. Her equipment scraped against the stone, but she managed to position the charge correctly. As she activated it, a strong current grabbed her and slammed her against the canyon wall. Her breathing apparatus was damaged, but she was already swimming toward the surface as fast as she could. Around the world, people watched the real-time updates on their screens. Green dots showed volunteers who had successfully placed their charges and returned to the surface. Yellow dots showed volunteers still underwater. Red dots showed emergencies. Isabella's dot had turned red. Her dive master, an experienced Italian Navy diver named Marco, was already descending to help when Isabella broke the surface. Her breathing gear was partially flooded. but she was conscious and breathing. "Charge placed successfully," she gasped as Marco pulled her toward their boat. "Tell my family I'm okay." One by one, the status dots turned green. David Murphy surfaced with 3 minutes to spare. Lin Wei completed her mission and spent an extra moment photographing the coral reef she had helped save. Kofi Asante's dolphins escorted him to the surface as if celebrating his success, but not everyone made it back easily. John Clearwater from the Maka tribe encountered an equipment malfunction at 190 feet. His underwater communicator died, cutting him off from command. His dive computer showed he had 7 minutes of air left and 8 minutes to reach the surface before his charge detonated. Without communication, John had to make a choice: surface immediately and save himself, leaving his charge unplaced, or trust his training, place the charge quickly, and hope he could reach the surface in time. On the command vessel, Dr. Chen watched John's green dot disappear from her screen. "We've lost contact with Clearwater. Emergency protocols are now in effect." But John Clearwater had spent his entire life learning from his grandfather about the relationship between humans and the ocean. His grandfather had taught him that the ocean would take care of those who took care of it. John placed his charge with careful precision, said a quick prayer in his native language, and began the fastest ascent of his life. He broke the surface just as his air ran out, gasping and coughing seawater. His boat crew pulled him aboard as he pointed down toward the water. "Charge is placed," he wheezed. 6 minutes until detonation." The final volunteer to surface was Carlos Mendoza, the oil rig worker from Mexico. His stress point was the deepest, at 220 feet, and the underwater terrain was the most complex. Carlos had worked on oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico for 15 years. He understood underwater construction better than almost anyone. But what he found at the bottom was unlike anything he had ever seen. The stress fracture wasn't just a crack. It was a complex network of intersecting fissures that stretched across the ocean floor like a spider web. Carlos realized that placing his charge at the calculated coordinates wouldn't be enough. The entire network needed to be addressed. "Command, this is Mendoza. The fracture system is more complex than we thought. I need to place multiple charges to address the full network." "Negative, Carlos. You only have one charge. Place it at the assigned coordinates and surface immediately." Carlos looked at his equipment. He had brought extra tools for his construction work, small-shaped charges used for underwater cutting. They weren't part of the mission plan, but they might work. "Command, I have supplemental charges. Not as powerful as the main device, but enough to address the secondary fractures, requesting permission to extend mission time." Dr. Chen felt her stomach drop. Carlos was asking to stay underwater longer, use more air, and take additional risks that could endanger not just himself, but the entire mission. "Carlos, that's not part of the plan. Surface now." But Carlos Mendoza was thinking about his 5 children in Guadalajara. His oldest daughter was starting college next year. His youngest son had just learned to read. They lived hundreds of miles from the coast, but if this mission failed, the economic collapse would affect everyone. "Dr. Chen, I've been building things underwater for 15 years. I know what I'm doing. Give me 8 extra minutes." There was silence on the radio. Then Dr. Chen made the hardest decision of her life. "You have 8 minutes, Carlos. Make them count." Carlos worked faster than he had ever worked before. He placed the main charge first, then swam to each secondary fracture. The small cutting charges weren't powerful enough to create major pressure relief, but they could prevent the fracture network from spreading. With 2 minutes left on his air supply and 1 minute until the charges detonated, Carlos began his ascent. He rose through the water faster than safety protocols recommended, knowing he was risking decompression sickness, but trusting that his years of experience would get him through. He broke the surface with 30 seconds to spare, just as the ocean floor erupted beneath him. The explosions weren't visible from the surface, but their effects were immediate. The turbulent water around each stress point suddenly calmed. The strange, warm currents stopped flowing. The ocean floor tremors that had been detected on seismographs around the Pacific stopped completely. It had worked. Dr. Chen stared at her instruments in disbelief. The pressure readings were dropping across all 67 stress points. The catastrophic collapse had been prevented. The ocean floor was stabilizing. "All teams, this is command," she announced, and for the first time in weeks, her voice sounded happy. "Mission accomplished. The collapse has been stopped. Repeat, the collapse has been stopped." Around the world, the celebration was instantaneous and universal. In refugee centers across the Pacific, people hugged strangers and cried with relief. Children who had been scared for weeks finally smiled. Elderly people who had thought they might never see their homes again began talking about rebuilding. In Mumbai, Maya Patel collapsed in her chair and sobbed. The app she had built to connect people with help had become the foundation for the largest act of human cooperation in history. Her phone buzzed with millions of messages of gratitude, but she was too exhausted and too happy to read them. In Osaka, Yuki Sato allowed himself a rare smile as he updated his logistics systems to begin coordinating the return home for evacuees. For the first time in years, he opened his apartment window to let in fresh air. But the most powerful celebration was happening on 67 boats scattered across the Pacific Ocean. David Murphy sat on his boat deck, still in his diving suit, calling his daughter in California. "Sweetheart, it's your dad. We did it. The baby is safe. The baby is safe, and I can't wait to meet my grandchild." Isabella Rossi was being checked by a paramedic for her injuries, but she was laughing and crying at the same time as she talked to her family in Italy. Carlos Mendoza was suffering from mild decompression sickness, but refused medical evacuation until he could call his children and tell them their father was coming home. All 67 volunteers had survived. All 67 charges had detonated successfully. All 67 stress points had been relieved. 50 million additional lives had been saved. In the weeks that followed, the world learned what human kindness could accomplish when it was organized and unlimited. The evacuation centers that had been built for emergency housing became models for new communities. Refugees didn't just return to their old homes, they worked with their host communities to build better neighborhoods that were both safer and more connected. The international cooperation that had developed during the crisis continued. Countries that had been rivals began sharing resources and technology. The global supply chains that had been created to support the evacuation became permanent networks for helping with future disasters. Most importantly, the spirit of helping that had emerged during the crisis became a permanent part of how people related to each other. The Help Now app, which Maya had originally created for the emergency, evolved into a global platform for everyday kindness. People used it to help elderly neighbors with groceries, to find tutoring help for their children, to offer rides to strangers, to share meals with people who were lonely. Schools around the world began teaching the story of the 67 as a lesson about courage, cooperation, and the power of individual action. The friendship bracelets that children had made for evacuees became an annual tradition, with kids making them for anyone who needed encouragement. But perhaps the most lasting change was in how people understood their relationship to the planet and to each other. A year after the crisis, Dr. Sarah Chen published her final report on what had become known as the Greatest Rescue. Her conclusion was simple. We discovered that when the planet calls for help, people answer not because they have to, but because caring for each other is fundamentally who we are. The report included profiles of all 67 volunteers, but also thousands of other people whose acts of kindness had made the mission possible. The translator who had worked 18-hour days, the child who had donated her birthday money, the farmer who had given his entire harvest to feed refugees, the teacher who had organized supply drives, the programmer who had built logistics systems, the artist who had painted murals in evacuation centers to give people hope. The report's title was simple: Every Life Remembered, Human Kindness, and the Day 67 answered the planet's call. 5 years later, David Murphy was pushing his granddaughter on a swing in a playground overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The water was calm and blue, giving no sign of the crisis that had once threatened to destroy everything. "Tell me the story again, Grandpa," the little girl said. "Tell me about the day you saved the world." David smiled and caught the swing. "I didn't save the world, sweetheart. A lot of people saved the world. I just played a small part. But you were brave." "I was scared," David said honestly. "But I was also a grandfather who loved his granddaughter very much, and sometimes love makes you brave." He pushed the swing again and watched his granddaughter laugh with delight. In the distance, a pod of whales was migrating north, their spouts visible on the horizon. The ocean was alive and healthy and safe. "The most important thing," David continued, "is that we learned something that week. We learned that when people are in trouble, other people help. Not because someone tells them to, not because they get paid, but because helping each other is what makes us human." The little girl nodded seriously. "And everyone helped?" "Everyone who could. Rich people and poor people. Young people and old people. People from every country and every language. People who had never met but who cared about each other anyway. Will people help like that again if they need to?" David looked out at the peaceful ocean and smiled. "I think they will, sweetheart. I think they always will. Because that's who we are." Above them, Maya Patel's Help Now app was still running on millions of phones, connecting people who needed help with people who were willing to give it. Every day, thousands of small acts of kindness happened because someone had built a bridge between human need and human caring. The planet had called for help, and people had answered. They always would, because human kindness was not a temporary response to crisis. It was the permanent foundation of who they were, and every life, every single one, was remembered.